welcome back. Happy Friday. Concepts in training. We'll be diving into another one of these things, considerations for programming and what to put in your program, or if you're a coach programming for somebody else, things to consider. Last time we talked about progressive overload. So when we look at now furthering that, now we have to look at exercise selection and exercise progression. So when we start to look at the different ways that we can maneuver and manipulate variables, we need to start to understand that we can progress weight, we can progress volume, and we can progress time under tension, but we need to start then looking at skill acquisition and layering skills on top of each other, right? So especially when we're looking at trying to increase towards a goal, we can progressively overload patterns, right? So when we look at main patterns that you'll see in the gym, you'll see a squat, you'll see a hinge, you'll see a push and a pull, right? Those are kind of like our main four, right? So like what fits in that squatting, right? Well, we look at squatting, we're really looking at 90 degrees of the hips and the knees, kind of that flexion moment. So when we start to look at then adding up skills, right? We might have single leg variations, we might have a split squat or a lunge. We take that goblet squat and we move it up to a safety bar squat or a front squat, and then we level it up to a back squat, and then we level it up to an overhead squat, right? We start to build on these skills, okay? All these different things kind of layer in over time. Same thing, we might start with a dumbbell bench press, right? Especially if somebody can't do a push-up, because then we can move to a push-up, and then we can move to a barbell bench press, which can then progress into a barbell incline press, which then can go into our shoulder press. Another way you could do that is then looking at, say, well, we can do a landmine press or a half kneeling landmine press to a half kneeling dumbbell press, which is a little more vertical, into a shoulder press. Right? So all of a sudden we start to layer these skills, and that's the big thing we have to consider. We have to identify the skills we want to develop, and we have to identify how do we break down components to focus on different aspects, right? Let's just say we want to increase somebody's ability, if we would consider squatting as an expression of function. It's one of the kind of lines of thought that I picked up from the pre-script crowd. But if you look at squatting as an expression of function, not necessarily the functional movement, how do we increase the function of the joints involved in that squatting motion so we can use that as a main strength driver or a main fitness driver to be able to kind of do a full body style of training? Well, we have to look at the main components. Well, I need to have ankle flexion and extension, or dorsiflexion, plantar flexion is what they're really called, knee extension and flexion. We need to be able to get into those end ranges of the knee. And then we will need to control the rotational forces of the hip, internal and external rotation, right? Or some people kind of also think hip flexion, extension. So when we look at those, now we have to start to look at how do we layer those skills, right? And so we can start to layer those up, across time and across pattern, right? So we can overload each of those joints, but we can also overload, patterns and start to layer patterns on from a simpler perspective and then start to make them more complex, right? So when we look at progression in training, right, we have our progressive overload, which is our load, volume, and time under tension. Then we have skill. I think that's the big one that a lot of people tend to miss, is they try to jump into bigger skills right off the bat instead of breaking those skills and the things that it's going to take to complete them over time and breaking those down and starting at the basics. So those are kind of that programming concepts, right? So we have progressive overload, and then we have skill acquisition or skill be able to help drive that program and get better results out of it.